Hello, I am Prabhu Chawla. Welcome to E-Expression, a digital platform from the New Indian Express Group for discussing, debating, and finding solutions to many complex issues faced by the country. Today, we are here to discuss and dissect ninth budget of the Modi government, jointly hosted by the Confederation of Indian Industry and the New Indian Express. The topic for today is budgeting for India's decade. And we have a very special panel of prominent industry giants and thinkers. We have with us here today in the studio Uday Kotak, President CII, Venu Srinivasan, Chairman TVS Motor Company, Sanjeev Bajaj, Vice President CII, Chairman and Managing Director of Bajaj Financial Services Limited, Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General of the CII. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining to discuss the budget today. First, I'll ask the CII president and the famous banker. Uday, you tell me one thing which you expected has not happened in the budget.
No increase in taxes.
That was a surprise, or you
expected that? There was a concern that there could be a COVID tax or something like that. The finance minister surprised us with no increase in taxes.
There's a cess on agriculture development on the petroleum product. That you are happy anyway. It doesn't affect you.
No, anyway. I'm just saying in general, the budget has ensured continuity and stability on taxation policy, which is extremely important. And there was concern that there could be some increase in taxes. So that is a positive surprise.
So that is one thing you expected. It has not happened. There's no taxation at all.
Yes.
Venu, is that the surprise for you? You expected this?
Well, I think the big thing that happened in this budget is the focus on capex.
No, Venu, I'm asking you one thing which you did not expect, which you expected and not happened.
Which I expected. I did not have much expectations from the budget. I was just waiting to see, because we are coming off COVID with huge deficits. And they said it was going to be a path-breaking budget. So frankly, I could not say what expectations I had. I was waiting to see what the budget of the century would look like.
Sanjeev, you tell us, you expected something which has not happened.
So Prabhu, from CII, we gave a large set of recommendations, and there were some major set of recommendations. When I take a look at them, the one word which has not happened is nothing. All our significant recommendations have been considered, and that's why we are all very positive on this budget.
No, that is expected. I want a very specific thing from all of you, one by one. From the CII perspective is different, but individually as an entrepreneur on your own right, I expected each one of you will have some kind of a priority which you were expecting from the government has not happened. But I think you're hedging your bets on that because you have expected a policy continuity, tax stability, which is a new jargon I've heard this time. Because all the time you have been asking for some changes in the tax structure. And this time Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, has imputed today also. One good thing about this is that there's no taxation. But that's okay. I can expect you. But another thing which everybody will ask you, but I want to ask you again, I hope you will not repeat it. One thing, Uday, which think is the best in this budget. Don't say tax stability. That you have told me.
I think the best thing about this budget is a very significant disclosure of a mindset which is pro-private sector enterprise and pro-markets. The budget has been very clear about the direction in which this government wants to take the destiny of India in the years to come. And the value of this is more than anything written on a piece of paper. It is changing the perspective that India is open to take calls for reform, even if it means some bets of higher borrowing in the short run, for going out there, respecting markets and respecting private enterprise. That is the biggest message and signal I read from the budget.
Recognizing the wealth creators, which Mr. Modi used to call last year. He said, I welcome wealth creators and want to encourage them.
Across the board, small, big business, go out there. We are with you. take the risk, create enterprise, create jobs as you create enterprise.
Venu, what was your good thing in this one thing? You said you're not expecting
One
anything, but
thing is investment in capital expenditure and infrastructure. For years, we've been crying hoarse that capital expenditure should be increased. They brought down revenue deficit and increased capital expenditure. This is the best thing for the future because continued investment in infrastructure is necessary to grow our economy and make it more competitive.
yeah, Sanjeev.
With the big emphasis on the real economy, to me, the one thing is the significant focus on strengthening the financial services sector, which has to support the real economy. So, whether it's the announcement of the development financial institution, whether it is the bad bank, a la the ARC, the AMC, the divestments that they've talked about in the two public sector banks and one general insurance company, and LIC's IPO, all very significant announcements. And as we see their execution, this will play a big role, not only the next year, but in the next many years to support our economic growth.
Chandraji, from the CII perspective, what do you think is the one good thing? You have given so many memorandums. I know hundreds of them must have gone.
So actually, the delight was to see this phenomenal focus on growth. And I think that's something which was extremely important. The government has betted on growth, and which has been across the spectrum of the budget. When we talk about that there was no raise in tax, one did not raise the taxes, etc. So everywhere you see it's betting on growth. And the boldness with which it is done, it is talked for the privatization, say for instance, it has been talked for the first time. We have heard about disinvestment in the past, but going through talking this boldness, both in terms of the reforms and the betting on growth are phenomenal aspects of the budget. And I see that cutting across the entire of the budget speech, it shows government's commitment towards not only, as Uday mentioned, pro-market, but I thought it's also really focused on betting on and very confident that yes, one big thing that needs to now happen is of course implementation, but that we can make these statements and we will keep our target strong. Let's not get worried about fiscal deficit. Let's put in our best to see to it, and money will come in. And I think that's a huge boldness in reforms. And you asked as to what we have not seen in the budget. I would think while many things have been, we had asked, it was a huge list of expected things, and we were tick marking, and we tick marked almost all boxes that we had asked for. But yes, there is, at this point in time, there are certain sectors which has been crying, which is the hospitality and the tourism sector. Probably they expected something in their basket for themselves. The civil aviation sector, they wanted something for their I would have also thought something coming in terms of one big announcement which was pending, which we keep asking. And I think some of these can come outside of the budget, by the way. Everything need not be in the budget, but some important thing was there's a huge amount of bills pending and payment pending for the private sector. We have been pushing for those to be sort of paid up. So there are a few things we will keep talking, I guess, about those ones.
You see, as a journalist, I've been covering Parliament and the budget for almost 40 years. It's the first time I'm hearing industry leaders not speaking about deficit. They have always been speaking control deficit budget, control deficit, reduce it to under the 3%, 4%. Suddenly, all of you are saying, no, it is a good thing to have a deficit budget. What changed your mindset? Suddenly, in 39 budget, if I read out the statement of all the past CII presidents, I have just read it, some of them. I don't want to quote them because it will be embarrassing. Because all of you have been talking about withdrawal of subsidies and controlled deficit financing. Suddenly, why you find deficit financing now the new panacea for some kind of a growth? Today, because you raised this question.
Yeah, Prabhu, I think we have got to also look at the sign of our times. We are coming out of a pandemic where I think the government of India needed to support lives and livelihood. And the government of India did it. That increased the deficit. We are just coming out of this pandemic. At a time like this, if we suddenly tighten fiscal deficit to the pre-COVID mindset, it would not be appropriate for an event which has happened once in 100 years, which is this pandemic. And therefore, at CII, we had recommended a glide path towards normalization of deficit over 3 years. What the finance minister has come out with is a glide path over a 4-year period, which is between 3 and 4, not a major change, but it is consistent with what we felt was the right way to do. Yes, the deficit for the year ended March 21, based on budget estimates, is higher than what some of us, or most economists, were saying. They were expecting around 7.5% of GDP for March 21. It has turned out to be 9.5%. But Prabhu, what I would give a lot of credit is, for the first time, we have got to a very high level of transparency in our financial numbers. And I must say that whether you talk to investors, analysts, economists, they give a huge value to transparency in the functioning of a company or a country. And therefore, coming out and saying, I will not have food subsidy and other things outside the budget, bringing it inside the budget, which is another 1.6% of GDP. Therefore, 9.5% has to be adjusted for it. Similarly, next year, 6.8 also, there is no hidden off-balance sheet items. Therefore, you are getting what you're seeing. Therefore, some of the deficit increase has happened because of transparency. That deficit was always there. It was not being shown. We are seeing, we are getting the mirror to see where we are.
I'll come out with this. What are the hidden facts? Where are they in the fine print? I'll just point out one by one after later when we go through. Because what happened, you wait a statement in the beginning, the first time, there's the private sector encouragement, there's industry encouragement, that I could see that shares, private investor capital growth went up by 5 lakh crore rupees in one day. All of you shareholders who own the company got 5 lakh crore rupees extra by the stock market. Whether the lower middle class did not get a single penny in the budget, that is what was expected, because they are taxing the same. This, as you rightly pointed out, the growth-oriented budget. There is a direction in this, I can see that. But growth depends on creating actual demand in the hands of the poor and middle-class people. What you see, how it is going to generate or escalate the demand part of it, which all of you are looking for. Ultimately, your profit or bottom line or budget, balance sheet will survive on the basis of more demand. I saw your balance sheet published in this quarter loss, last quarter loss, or less than the previous quarter. In fact, if I look at that. So how you look at the budget in terms of stimulating demand in the rural areas and other areas?
I think, Prabhu, one thing that we have not done over many years is the focus on infrastructure. We've been slowly disinvesting. Now we move to privatizing, which is a very solid thing. But ultimately, demand has to come from building infrastructure. You've seen it in China. The entire Chinese economy is based on excellent investment in infrastructure, which also reduces the cost of moving goods, having more electricity available. So we are, for the first time, seeing a huge boost in investment, and I think it's a very positive thing. And as Uday said, I think a transparent budget with the fiscal deficits being shown to be what they actually are, and allocating more for capital and less for revenue. I think this is the right way to go. Stock market reacts. Stock markets are ephemeral. It goes up one day, it goes on one day. So saying 5 lakh crores, we have not got 5 lakh crores in a bank account. It is in a piece of paper, and tomorrow it may go down.
Feel-good factor that I am richer by so much. Sir.
Yeah, there's a feel-good factor, and it will go down to everybody. Ultimately, businesses do well, economy does well. We will, as a country, do well, and people will get more.
You see, as Ubed pointed out, I'll take that point forward. Transparency, for example, he talked about the first time we are seeing transparent data. Sanjeev is a finance person. He runs a big finance successful company also. I'm going to ask him that how is it transferred when the gap between the expenditure and the income, which is projected in the budget, is huge, 12 lakh crore rupees. Tell me which way, because they are saying some bad bank. I don't know whether bad bank is a bad idea or a good idea, because there's discussion about that. They are talking about disinvestment or privatization, 2 banks and 1 PSU, maybe LIC IPO is coming. Do you think this 12 lakh crore rupees without taxation anywhere, where is this hit? I can't find in the transparency factor where it is coming from. You have read the budget, more detail.
No, so the transparency, as Uday said, is in including a lot of the off-balance sheet expenditures this time into the main numbers, and the transparency is in the disclosure. The execution now will be on the basis of the spends, which will initially start from the government in various sectors of infrastructure, which should help to create jobs. That coupled with the fact that we are at the better end of the pandemic right now, as long as we can ensure quick vaccination across the country, it will help in getting consumer confidence back. That will start the consumer demand cycle, which means then as capacities get utilized, private sector starts investing again, and you end up creating a whole virtuous cycle. This cycle, see, as you know, the deficit is an issue of numerator and denominator. This cycle aims to build on the economy, expand the denominator, and get the numerator down. The only other theoretical way is by contracting the economy, get the numerator down, but that in most cases has never been shown to help in meeting the fiscal deficits. And I'll make one more point. We must keep in mind we are not like the Western world, which is a developed world, all infrastructures by and large in place. So that's a working capital economy. We are very much a capital investment economy, where we need to invest in the infrastructure to build our future. So some deficit, not any deficit, but some deficit is understandable and acceptable. And as Venu mentioned also, it is not just the size of the spend, the quality of the spend is very important. So we have to see that the spend goes into capex, into infrastructure, because then it has long lasting multiplier effect on economic growth.
No, I get the point. I'm asking you where the money will come from. Transparency in terms of revenue coming forward. If there is some generic statement that we will sell this and we will sell this, how will the 12 lakh rupees which you're talking about infrastructure you have to spend? Okay, by selling the family silver, which is everything will be sold according to the budget, the spirit of the budget that we will sell and sell. Whether there is a buyer or not, we don't know, because we have been trying to sell for the past 12, almost 12 or 14 years. Disinvestment targets have never been met by any government, whether this government or the earlier government. So the track record of disinvestment is very poor. That is something. When I'm asking you, all of you, Chandrajit, you may be able to answer this question. Where will this 12 lakh rupees gap which is happening for expenditure, for infrastructure, which when you're talking about, you have to build roads or airports or the health sector or whatever you want to do, schools or colleges. Infrastructure means labor intensive. I assume that infrastructure means labor intensive labor structure where you get the money in the hands of people and let's spend and buy Venu scooter or buy something finance from Sanjeev or go to the bank of Uday Kotak to get some money. Where will this money come from? 12 lakh crore rupees. Can you give me some idea? Because I've been finding answer for this question. I've not been able to get it myself. 12 lakh crore rupees, where will it come from?
So I think, as I mentioned at the outset, the budget has really betted very strongly on growth. And of course, you yourself spoke about disinvestment and privatization. And yes, the track record has been, but this is a very bold one. And I see, and there is a need today, and that need itself will get help the implementation of it. But three critical areas of immediate intervention for deepening the recovery and catapulting, so to say, to a high growth orbit are really demand generation, both consumption and investments, improving credit availability, and employment generation. And I think the first two benefits, industries across the segments and sectors. And the third is the most effective way, if one can say, of ensuring an inclusive growth. But having said that, the budget proposal provide a big boost to all the three critical areas that I mentioned, and it's also simultaneously displays very strong fiscal management and ensuring macroeconomic stability, and it really also sets the tone for the big ticket reforms. And all of this together, if you see, really brings in that phenomenal focus on growth, and that's how I guess the government is betting on it, to see that we are able to finance that, or the finance that deficit that you are talking about. So I think this betting on growth,
you're right.
Very, very important point.
Intent and intention of the budget and spirit of the budget, nobody can question. The six principles which Prime Minister enunciated, they are very well. But the question is, as you look at the past, I'm again repeating start, in 98, Railway decided to monetize its land bank. 25 years later, we are still not able to raise in 1,000 crore rupees. The value of that land bank is over 1 million, 10 lakh crore rupees. So I'm just saying that money has to come, because when we were teacher of economics and student of economics, we were told supply creates its own demand. Supply has been creating demand till a couple of years ago. Now demand has to create the supply. But demand, I just want to know, because as a consumer, if middle class and lower middle class doesn't get the money in their hand, taxation structure buying what it is, how will you do it? And the other thing is that you're talking about big growth budget. I'm just looking at the figures again, budget figures. You know the last final figures of the 2021 expenditure estimates, actual 34.5 lakh crore. Correct me, Uday, if you have read it. 34.5 lakh rupees was the actual expenditure by 31st March 2021. And estimated budget for the next year, 34 lakh 48 lakh, 34.48. Where is the expenditure?
Yeah, I think Prabhu, you've really obviously got your facts on your fingertips. Here is what I would like to say.
Where the
Number one,
expenditure goes? Which was last year, what you spent at the same level you are going to do?
I'm coming to that. First, we are all we are all in our ways. We run our businesses, our companies, and in many ways, what is true for a company is true for a country.
Correct.
There has to be a strategy, and there has to be a roadmap, and there has to be execution. So what this budget has very well done has got the strategy and the roadmap in front of
Correct.
us. It is now, as we all know, when we run our companies, the heart of the sustainable success is execution. And we would like to support the government as the government goes down a very strong execution plan, which is needed in the years to come. And let me take you back to Margaret Thatcher, 1980. She changed the UK with the passion, purpose, and surgical execution of their privatization plan. That is what I think India has to embark upon with a certain vigor and a rigor. And I hope that is something which we see in the next 12 to 24 months. So that is point number one. Point number two on total expenditure. As Venu rightly said, and Sanjeev corroborated, what we are doing is we are shifting from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure. And that is a quality of expenditure which is very important. Therefore, you kept the budgeted expenditure under control by reducing the wasteful expenditure, which we may call as revenue expenditure in some cases, okay? And moving it to CapEx, which will give sustainable real assets on the ground for future generations. One of the worries each of us should have is that when we borrow, we are borrowing from the future generations. It is our duty to ensure that the borrowing is well used for returns which the future generations get. And that can only happen if we invest the borrowed money into right assets which generate returns over decades in the future. That is how we protect future generations, Prabhu.
Well, you are a good banker. You have raised a very fundamental question. You are borrowing for a future generation. From 98 or even 91, when the reform started, borrowing of the government has been increasing every year. To meet the capital expenditure and the revenue, whatever you're talking about, government will have to raise 3,500 crore rupees per day. And the cost of borrowing it, that you are leaving the next generation of minor years under debt for many, many more decades, because paying for the debt, you're spending almost 40% of your revenue on debt and services alone. And it is going after year. This time is 21% debt in servicing. Last 2 years ago, it was 18%. Before that, it was 15%. So debt servicing has been going because you're not repaying the debts which you are raising. 3,500 crore rupees you will borrow from somewhere. Obviously, the cost of borrowing will also bring down the growth because it will be heavy cost to be paid for development. What do you answer? How do you answer this question?
The answer should be coming from where we invest. In the past, budget deficits have been giving away revenue expenditure, which does not get us any return. I think for the first time, we are seeing a qualitative difference that the expenditure is focused on capex. And the more we focus on capex, and there are more areas, privatization we're talking about. What about water? What wastewater that we throw out in India can have there's enough water for all the cities in India, but we do not recycle practically any water except in Chennai, 30%. But even 70% goes into the sea. I think if you invest in infrastructure that has got an economic payback, then you will be able to recover your money and reduce your interest or debt service expenditure. But as long as we've been spending more and more on revenue, there is no return. And that's where we are today. And I think this is a major change in the direction of the country in this budget towards long term, having solid capex and a return, which is what industry also does.
No, this is the question which I'm looking at. Again, my favorite subject is stock market comes back. Because 90% of your FDI last year came into only hot market, stock market, which is non-productive, which has nothing to do with the real growth. So if that kind of foreign investment running into billions and billions of dollars coming in, investment possibilities in the real estate, you're talking about infrastructure. So there's some kind of a mismatch in our funding processes, fund coming from outside and internal resources which we generate for investing in real infrastructure. Because FDI is not coming into infrastructure at all, as you go by the last year figures. In pandemic, when the entire country, entire world was going down, the stock market was going up. There is something which economics I have not read in my life. So there must be something very hot there happening. But infrastructure is a good idea. It is a very good thing that they are going to spend more money on capex and on infrastructure. But basic thing started how you will raise the demand, which all of you will almost benefit from there, because you have to inequalities of income is already known. Because the top 1%, 2% people are getting about 80% benefit. So where is the demand, which is the mass demand, which is rural demand? How will it come from this budget after budget?
Now you look at China, look at emerging markets. I think Sanjeev made the point. We are not a working capital economy. We are a economy that does require infrastructure. Infrastructure means the use of labor, capital, and a trickle down effect. And we will have economic growth. And the lower down in the economy, people will get the money to spend. So you have to have the commitment, as we do in corporates. When we spend on capex, we expect a return, and that return is plowed back into growing the company. I think the same is true of our economy.
But that happens in the private company. Yes, they plow back the profit into the company expansion and diversification. What happens? But in terms of government, this has not happened. Technology-wise, we are very important. Uday, I just want to go back to the basic nuts and bolts of the budget. They are talking about two private banks will be nationalized. Do you have any idea about it? You may be
I
buying
think,
one of them.
no, Prabhu, I think you've got to really look at, again, it's a very bold step. I cannot remember in the history of my career, in a post-nationalized world, where any government has had the courage to go out and say, we will privatize two public sector banks. And I genuinely believe the correct model for India at this stage of our evolution is
Which
a
are the
total
banks?
of four.
I'm interested in which are the banks you can suspect to on the hit list.
My view is that the larger banks, which is the State Bank of India and the four other merged banks, which are a total of 12, or
Yeah.
those banks will not be privatized. It would be, my sense is it will be out of the others.
Others which are on the bottom line. They are just struggling
Which
to
are
survive.
relatively the smaller ones. And that is where you get best of both the worlds. You get large banks continuing in the public sector, consolidated. And out of the balance, you test out the waters with a couple of them.
Sanjeev,
And thereafter, see how it goes.
Sanjeev, you have any idea which PSU is going to be privatized?
Prabhu, as you just said, that the stock market is very hot. So I don't think we should be making it hotter by.
It doesn't make a difference to my life or maybe yours, because you are not into those who are interested. I'm just trying to which PSU can give that kind of money. I'm just trying to get the idea of raising 12 lakh crore rupees. It has to come either through disinvest privatization, or I don't know from where demand generation extra GST will generate, or hopefully they'll get more GST from 1 lakh 20 lakh crore to maybe 1 lakh 50,000 crore. Maybe that is possible. But I'm just, I mean, you guys must be knowing which is the PSU which is on the block.
So nobody knows, right? Because if we knew, then we should have also known this announcement would have been on that stock.
Because LIC suddenly you find it's spending a lot of money on advertising, IPO. They have mentioned the budget anyway. IPO will be there in the budget. That is. But again, I am saying that what kind of demand this budget will infrastructure of what kind all of you are talking about? Can you pinpoint this is what the areas you need should be have the infrastructure development where you can generate demand and put more money in the hands of what I call the vitamin M, which money is required in the hands of people, which think all of you, but Vinu, you may be, or Chandrajit, you tell me which kind of, what is the kind of infrastructure you're talking about?
So, I mean, you saw that in the budget, she very clearly spelled out a lot of infrastructure focus on both the rural as well as the highways. A huge focus on that, a huge focus on road building, and I think and it's happening at a where we see is in the manner in which, of course, it's happening. The number is we are building almost 40 kilometers. Per day of highways, which is a big improvement from where we were till today. So that itself is a big area for which brings in demand. And so at this juncture, most engines of the economy are as all of us know, have been in a sort of a slowdown mode. So consumption demand, be it the private investments as well as exports, and the onus of the demand cycle really falls squarely on public investment at this point in time, and that's what the government really has really done. I would think that that's one area, which is the second thing that they have also talked about a lot is in terms of health infrastructure. When they talked about spending on health, and I see a lot of rural infrastructure building, both in terms of healthcare, health infrastructure, as well as other social infrastructures that they have talked about creating in the rural side. That would be an important area to generate demand, and that also the rural sector would need to be nurtured. And I think that's something which is going to be very, very critical. I really see these two to be very big areas: infrastructure as well as this entire thing about the rural infrastructure, and all of this has a huge multiplier effect in generating demand for multiple other sectors. The construction sector itself has a phenomenal multiplier effect, as also is a second most important employment generating sector. So I see this.
You spoke about health sector, because if you take out 35,000 crore rupees provided for the vaccine and take out the water which is added into the health sector now, pani and whatnot, there hardly any increase in the health sector infrastructure as against the last year, 4,000 crore rupees. That is because 35,000 rupees goes into because that is also little, they might add more. But health, what we are talking about, rural infrastructure, again, I'm coming back to, because it depends on how much rural infrastructure you create. Manrega, you have reduced the amount money from their hand, because a lot of money has been taken away from Manrega. And rural roads have been under construction, most of people are doing. So, but rural infrastructure, there is no specific information coming out. Yes, again, I'm going back to the intent direction of the budget is very well defined. But what is not defined is how it is going to be implemented. Performance of the government on various promises in the past has been very good. But when it comes to delivery on the infrastructure, 40 kilometers per day, yes, that's a record Nitin Gadkari has really done. He is on the highway himself every day. He is the highway minister, not only highway minister, he is the highway mentally the highway on the highway all the time. But question arises how to create demand, because as I coming back to the basic thing, my sociological background, because unless you reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, because ultimately upper middle class can't create excessive demand because they have more appetite for anything foreign rather than made in India is not happening. So how you create the indigenous demand by generating employment in lower income brackets? So you have got 56% of services sector, which employs less than 15% of the labor force. You have 60% agriculture, which gets only 15% of the national income. How these imbalances have to be corrected? Sanjeev?
Prabhu, we don't have to go too far behind. Look at the decade of the 2000s and what investment in infrastructure, at that time it was highways, airports, power generation, what that did overall for demand, even on the consumer demand, the same middle class that you're talking about spent handsomely for us to grow 9.5% for many years. It's really after that, the entire infrastructure continued investment is what got stuck, and that brought us down to this economic slowdown, and then the pandemic has hit us. So the answers are already there. We just and this does not require any rocket science. It's a question of doing the simple things. But to your point, of course, there has to be good execution. If there is no execution, then it's only a strategy and a plan on paper. But we believe that the government is intent on this execution. And what has changed compared to that decade is, if you see over the last 2 years, the overall rhetoric around the world, led by the US, on wanting an alternate manufacturing to China, has become more and more loud. And this is not a short-term political ploy. It seems to be quite consistent, which means there is an opportunity for other countries. Of course, Southeast Asian countries are also there to stand up to it, but nobody has the manpower and the capacity that we do. And that's where we have seen the government with its PLI scheme announcements, supporting exports. We've seen a number of these initiatives. But yes, this will be a multi-year effort, and it requires very strong execution. So let
So
us.
you think basically that there's a need for better execution this time if you have to get some kind of growth back on track.
Very clearly, because you've been the critic so far in this discussion, as you're supposed to in your role, asking most of your questions about, will the government be able to execute? Will they be able to divest? Will they be able to, actually get onto the not only the road but also the railway and spend that money productively in capex? So yes, it's all about execution now.
So since you asked me that, I have not asked this question, I'm asking you, will this government be able to execute as efficiently as you expect?
Avi, I'm not in the government, but
No,
what
but
we
you have
certainly
experience, right?
expect, and if I see the recent action during the pandemic of how they've helped the economy recover through the significant fiscal stimulus that came at multiple times and all the other benefits as well, they have actually put their neck there on the line and executed. So I'm hopeful that they will.
You see, the topic for today is this budgeting for India's decade, because we all of us expect that India is going to lead the economy, world economy in the next one decade, not in terms of size of the market, but in terms of delivery system. We have better system in India, we have better execution, we have better decision-making processes, a strong government. So when you talk forward, because one of the problem of deficit financing will be inflationary deficit, which is fallout of any deficit financing. I'm not, are you watching some kind of a inflationary trend in the market already, as I have done it, Uday?
Uh, Prabhu, in one of the important points is when the government is going for a relatively higher deficit than what was envisaged. One of the most important things at that point of time is a very close coordination between the government and the Reserve Bank. So the fiscal policy and monetary policy have to work very closely together to ensure that while the transformation is underway, as the government starts borrowing higher, there is no crowding out for investment financing required by the private sector. We have the RBI policy on 5th of February, that is tomorrow. I think that'll be a very important aspect to watch about how the government and RBI are, while keeping the independence of monetary policy, but also looking at the national priorities of growth while looking at inflation. That balance is going to be crucial for fiscal and monetary to deliver a reasonable range bound interest rate scenario. I don't say that interest rates have to be fixed at a price, but they have to be in reasonable range so that investment decisions taken by businesses are in a more stable interest rate environment and not subject to volatility. If that happens, infrastructure investment happens, real assets happen on the ground, then you have got an answer for inflation. But in the interim, government and RBI need to work very deftly.
No, Uday, you're right. In the beginning, also made a statement. Modi government has assured stability of policies now. If you go by this budget, and if this continues for the next one decade, I'm talking about decade-long perspective now. All of you have got it. You have got assurance that policy will be stable. There won't be changes, tinkering with the policy all the time. So it gives you much more leeway and long-term planning to invest in the future sector, whatever you want to do. Venu, I want to ask, giving this assurance that there won't be any changes in any kind of fiscal policy or monetary policies, except tinkering with some time, how much investment you see in your own area during the next 1 decade?
We see significant investment in our industry for two reasons. One is capacity expansion. Indian exports are growing, I think led by Bajaj, followed by TVS. And India is becoming competitive in exports. The changeover to the electric transportation era that will take place, we will be investing very heavily. So will others be doing the same thing, whether it's Bajaj or Hero. So I think you're going to see a lot of investment from the transport sector, both to meet the demand as well as to meet the requirements of sustainability. And I want to make one point. When you have infrastructure investment as the main deficit, you're going to have less inflation than in the previous years when they have had revenue deficits, which go into consumption, then which go into inflation, which also go into buying more foreign goods, as you said. So revenue deficits have a serious evil effect, like eating too much sugar or carbohydrates. But
Sanjeev,
capital
what do you
investment is
think?
like eating dal.
Sanjeev, just tell us the next decade of your company, your area, how it is going to grow after the assurance of a stable policy at the level of the central government.
Prabhu, in the last decade itself, across financial services companies, we have grown between 20 and 35% CAGR. Of course, we are larger today than what we were a decade ago. But with this kind of a stable, growth-oriented policy, I see no reason why we should not see strong double-digit growth continuing through the next decade.
Sanjeev, what is your point of view on this? Your members, so many members you have got, how much extra investment do you expect in total in the country as percentage of current investment, capital expenditure?
As you know, private investment has been muted. But what was one looking forward to in the budget was a sort of a stable sort of a taxation and a regime and a stable policy regime. Many of the sectors are looking up pretty strongly. There is good feedback coming from the construction sector, construction equipment sector, the mineral-based sector. There is a positive growth coming from the mineral-based sector. Pretty upbeat. The capital goods sector, the machine tool sector, they have been also very positive. The auto sector, generally has been pretty much all right, I would say. So there are many sectors which have been actually doing exceedingly well. So if you look at the results of some of the companies in the construction equipment sector, etc., they've really been booming. Actually, the reports are very, very strong, higher than what it was compared to 2019. Forget 2020. So there are sectors which are very strong now with the stability in the budget in terms of both the direction of reforms, and if the interest rate remains stable, I would imagine that we would soon see capacity utilization going upwards of 75% very soon, and private sector would come back onto the table to invest.
You see, I'm coming to the last question on this because vaccination is very important for reviving the economy because attendance in the offices was 50%, 60%. I don't know what is the percentage of people coming to your workstation now. Uday, how many people are coming back to your companies?
So first of all, Prabhu, on the bank branches, it is an essential service. So through the entire lockdown period, the bank branches were functional at 90% plus, and therefore the entire branch banking side is fully functional. At the formal offices, the attendance, that is the corporate offices and head offices, the attendance is still low. At an average, it's about 30 to 40% as things stand today.
Venu, your company, what is the percentage of total workforce which is coming?
We are basically a manufacturing company, and therefore we will be 100% of manufacturing people are on the floor since August. And now more and more engineers and design offices, people are coming back. Sales people have been on the field. So more than 75% are actually coming to work. And this will, I think, with vaccination and confidence, improve to 100%. It'll never come back to fully 100 because we've all learned that you can work from home. Flexible working will be a way of life. Maybe it'll come back to 90 or 85, but I think offices will find that today we are able to give people greater freedom to work from home, and that is something that new that we have learned during this crisis.
Sanjay, your business such where you require personal interaction with the people. So your experience till now? It is back to say 70%, 80%.
Again, Prabhu, in our case, as far as branches is concerned, insurance or NBFC, we would be 90% plus. As far as our other offices are concerned, one of the things we've very clearly learned is that certain roles can definitely be work from home. So I would say, as of today, about 15 to 20% of those roles are at home, and of the remaining 80%, nearly 60-65% are at work. So, and we rotate. So people come a few days and then they work a day from home so that we keep enough distancing still in the office. But yeah, the work goes on at full speed.
You see, as far as COVID concerns, India is one of the countries which has handled very well because that is where we have come back to normalcy almost much faster and developing the vaccine also much faster. Chandrij, I would like to know because government has set some parameters. I know that how we'll get the vaccination first. But as the industry leaders, don't you think you would have also taken a lead of suggesting the government, okay, we at our own level vaccinate our own employees and put them back at confidence level because could have been done. I don't know. Any initiative the CII took to suggest to the government, okay, leave it to us to procure the vaccination and vaccinate our employees?
Yeah, I think at CII, we have created a task force under the leadership of Mr. Narendran, the president designate, who takes charge as president after my term. Therefore, in order to ensure continuity, we felt the best way is to have a full-fledged task force on the whole area of vaccination. It is closely interacting with government, including giving a number of recommendations of how distribution can be expedited. And I'll request my colleague Chandrajit, who's closely involved with this exercise, to give what are the specific steps as CII which we are dialoguing with government. Chandrajit.
No, I'm asking individually because Uday Kotak as chairman and managing
No,
director.
my view is
government. I don't know the procedure. Therefore, I'm asking you that would have been faster because
my view is very clear. I think the government has followed a certain path of vaccination. First the health workers, then the people above 50. I would really like to see this speed up even faster.
Yeah, Chandrajit, advise you.
Points. 2 points. One is the one which you actually mentioned. One of the recommendations of CII through this vaccine task force, which has in its membership a large number of different types of people. One is of course the vaccine manufacturers themselves, the healthcare providers are involved in it, the cold storage are involved in it. Dr. Guleria is co-chairing it. And we have been in discussion both with the government, with Niti Aayog, etc. One of the things that we have actually said that like the healthcare workers, etc., are extremely important and they should be vaccinated, of course, as a priority. But from the point of view of livelihood and to create livelihood, it is very important that even industrial workers, etc., they are also vaccinated with priority. So that is a very strong recommendation of CII. The second aspect is basically to see how private sector can come in. So the private sector with its competence to actually really take this government effort further to see a large number of the population are actually vaccinated. So we need to open this up to the private sector to partner with the government, and that's a very strong demand and the request that CII has. In fact, there is a letter and a note to this effect, which has gone from Uday as the president of CII to the Prime Minister of India. So that's a very important thing, and we are actually at this point in time extremely happy to see the phenomenal stress which you also mentioned in the budget which has been given to vaccination. And I think that is going to be one of the key areas. I mean, if we are going to spend 35,000 crores in the vaccine program, it is going to be one of those booster doses as one sees in many of the stress sectors, like if we see movement of people really coming back to the country.
You see, this recovery of the economy depends much more. You come out of the fear of COVID. That's what it is, because all of you as the industry has it performed well. Exports have done very well in this country now. So what I'm trying to raise, the involvement of private sector in the distribution, vaccination of India is not visible at the moment, because you are, as Uday has pointed, we will go by the government procedure. But government of Modi, particularly Prime Minister Modi, is open to more ideas and ideas. How to make it fast? Because we have the production capacity. That's not, we are suffering for a production capacity. We are only limited by the distribution capacity, vaccination capacity. The role of the private sector becomes much more important. Each employer has 1 lakh employees, 2 lakh employees. They can also be vaccinated at the same time if the supply is available. I'm not suggesting that you bypass the priority sector. That is the point I was trying to make there.
My point, Prabhu, is that if you look at supply, from what I understand from Serum Institute, they've got 50 million doses. Some of them expire somewhere around April, May. In fact, they are very keen to distribute the doses faster than the current pace. So supply is not an issue at this stage, at least.
So it's a distribution issue. That's why I'm saying private sector, you could have, for example, ordered 1 million doses for your employees.
Yeah.
Because there's a wastage also. If your average is 70% per day, it means 30% life of this vaccine is very limited. If you don't do the same day, it dies. So that's what I'm saying. Why don't you still get active as a private sector? Okay, give us permission to use our vaccine by ourselves and just vaccinate our employees who are willing to get vaccinated.
I think at CII, we have made recommendations for private sector to participate in the distribution. But I think the issue from the government point of view is that they want to ensure equitable distribution rather than preferences to A or B or C category. Other than health workers, when I mean A or B or C category, I mean large corporates getting a benefit versus the small scale sector. They want to ensure that the distribution is equitable. That's what the government seems to be focused on.
I'm not getting the nuance. I'm talking the health of India is much more important for better functioning or better delivery and better productivity of the private sector industry. As economics, they say, if other things remain the same, it means you don't disturb the equitable distribution and priority sector. If you have the supply there, because I see there's no shortage of supply in this country, only the machinery, they are activating most of them, which has been activated various places, is still 70% average all over India, which is improving every day. But it is in the interest of industry, because I'm a little surprised, because government should have involved. They are open to ideas, again I'm saying. So I'm making, as a newspaper journalist, that private sector should also be very active in demanding that, okay, we should also be involved as per the government guidelines to vaccinate our own employees.
So, Prabhu, we are fully supportive of this. We believe private sector getting more active in distribution is something we strongly recommend and support. And if that can be broader communicated with an eminent journalist and media platform like yours, that would certainly be something we would very much appreciate.
We are frontline workers, but we are not given priority anyway. Thank you very much for all of you joining here. I think it's going to be a very good decade of excellence and development. And I hope what you think, infrastructure development will happen and India will grow and become more international power than all of us think. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.